You know that feeling when you're so excited you can barely sit still? That was me today. My grandson Nolan was finally coming to visit me here in Seattle. I'd been counting down the days. He's 22 now, in college, and I don't get to see him nearly enough since he lives all the way in Philly with his parents. But today was my day. So there I was, pacing around my little house, making sure everything looked just right, fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing, wiping down the counter for the third time, and then the doorbell rang. I practically ran to the door, but when I opened it, there was Nolan standing there. Someone else, another young man, about his age, standing awkwardly next to him. He was tall, black, and he had this kind of shy smile, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. Grandma Nolan said, rubbing the back of his neck like he does when he's nervous, "This is my friend." "Darius?" I kind of brought him with me, hope that's okay." I blinked a little, surprised, but I smiled anyway. "Well, of course it's okay. Come on in, both of you." As they stepped inside, Nolan kept talking, kind of rambling. "Darius is my roommate at school. His parents are splitting up right now, and he didn't really have anywhere to go for the summer. I figured instead of him just hanging around campus, he could come here. I mean, if it's all right with you." I laughed, honey. "I live alone. Two of you sounds way better than just one. And I'm not going to let someone's summer suck if I can help it. You're both welcome here." Darius smiled, finally looking a little less tense. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "Call me Madison." I told him none of that ma'am business. "Now, are you too hungry? 'Cause I made way too much food, as usual. Lunch was perfect. Classic grandma food, you know. I made a roast with mashed potatoes and gravy, and of course my famous apple pie was cooling on the counter for dessert. We all sat around my little dining table, and the conversation just flowed. Nolan, bless his heart, had stories for days, and most of them were about Darius. "You wouldn't believe this guy. Grandma," he said, pointing at Darius with a forkful of mashed potatoes. "Every time we're out, women just flock to him. It's ridiculous. He's like a human magnet. I despise him." He said it with a grin, clearly kidding, but Darius just laughed and shook his head. "I can't help it if I'm charming," Darius said, flashing a smile that could have powered the whole house. I couldn't help but notice how true it was. Darius had this easy confidence about him, but not in a cocky way. It was just natural. His voice was rich and smooth, like one of those late-night radio hosts, and his face, let me tell you, the boy could have been a movie. His jawline was so sharp, it looked like it was carved out of marble. And his skin, this beautiful, deep, earthy tone, was flawless. And don't even get me started on those lips. Full, soft-looking, and, well, you get the idea. I don't know what came over me, but I realized my jaw was hanging open while I stared at him. Darius must have noticed, because he cleared his throat, snapping me out of it. "Oh," I blurted out, fumbling for something to say. "I was just, thinking about what to cook for dinner tonight, for you two." Nolan looked at me like I'd grown another head, but thankfully he let it slide. Darius just chuckled, and I tried to shake off whatever weird spell I'd fallen under. After we finished eating, we moved out to the front yard to sip coffee and enjoy the sunshine. My lawn was a bit, well, let's just say it was overdue for a trim. Darius glanced around and then grinned. "Miss Madison, we need to. Trim your bushes. They're getting out of control." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me?" He laughed, holding up his hands. "I meant the lawn. Look, there's grass growing everywhere. Why don't Nolan and I take care of it for you?" "Oh," I said, feeling my cheeks flush right. "The lawn? Sure. If you two don't mind." "Not at all," Nolan said, already heading for the tools in the shed as they got to work. I stood there watching them, Darius laughing as he showed Nolan how to use the trimmer properly. Both of them looking so full of light. Nolan grabbed the big garden shears and got to work trimming the hedges, muttering to himself about how I let them get comically overgrown. Darius, on the other hand, fired up the old lawn mower and got to business. It was one of those classic summer afternoons. warm enough to make the iced coffee in my hand feel like a blessing, but not so hot that you couldn't be outside. I sat back on the patio chair, banning myself lightly as I watched the two of them work. Nolan was all over the place, hacking at the bushes like he was in a battle with them. But Darius, he was focused, steady. The lawnmower roared as he pushed it across the grass, his white t-shirt starting to cling to him as sweat dampened the fabric. The way his muscles moved, flexing with each step he took, caught my attention in a way that surprised me. His broad shoulders and lean frame had this effortless grace, like he could have been on the cover of a fitness magazine without even trying. And there I was, sitting in my patio chair, sipping my coffee and staring like some loving teenager. My heart swelled not just with admiration, but with this odd mix of emotions I couldn't quite put my finger on. It didn't make any sense. I mean, come on, I'm 67. I've been through a marriage, a divorce, raised kids, and now grandkids. But something about Darius's presence stirred up feelings I thought had gone dormant long ago. Was it his charm, his confidence, or maybe it was just the simple fact that I'd been so lonely for so long when my husband left me 10 years ago? I didn't think I'd ever feel like myself again. And honestly, I didn't not completely sure I'd learned to live with the quiet, but the truth is, loneliness has a way of sneaking up on you. It settles into the cracks of your life, making you long for connection, for something, anything. I took a deep breath and shook my head, trying to snap myself out of it. This wasn't about me. I was just glad to have company for once, to feel the energy of youth in my home and my yard. Darius paused for a moment, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand and glancing over at me with that easy smile of his. "You doing okay over there, Miss Madison?" "Oh, I'm fine," I said quickly, sitting up a little straighter. "You two are doing such a great job out there. I might have to hire you both full-time." He laughed, a low, rich sound that sent a little flutter through me. I tried very hard to ignore. "Don't tempt me. I might take you up on that." I smiled back, hoping he couldn't see through me as they worked. I reminded myself that this was just a fleeting moment of connection, a reminder of what it felt like to have people around after they finished with the lawn. Darius walked up to me, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. His t-shirt clung to him, and I had to remind myself to keep my eyes firmly on his face. "Miss Madison," he said, flashing me that mischievous grin. "It was nice trimming your bushes. Feel free to call me whenever they grow back." I blinked, caught off guard by the way he said it, like there was a little something more behind his words. My cheeks went hot, and before I could stop myself, I replied, "Well, it's been years since anyone took care of my bushes. Feels good to have someone around." The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to kick myself. What was I thinking? But Darius just chuckled, his laugh rich and warm, and that only made me feel more flustered, trying to shake off the awkwardness. I cleared my throat and said, "Why don't you take a shower? You must be feeling sticky after all that work." "Thanks, I appreciate that," he said, looking genuinely grateful. I led him to the bathroom and showed him how to work the old knobs for the water. "It can be a little tricky," I said. "Just twist it gently or it'll stick," he nodded, giving me a small smile. "Got it. Thanks again." I left him to grab some clothes from his suitcase, and a minute later I heard the water running, but instead of walking away, I lingered just outside the door, my mind wandering in ways that really shouldn't have. I could picture him under the spray, his smooth skin glistening, those strong hands running through his hair. I shook my head, trying to snap myself out of it. "Get a grip, Madison. He's just a guest, and you're being ridiculous." Just then, Nolan called me from the living room, and I practically jumped. "Grandma, come check out the lawn." Relieved for the distraction, I hurried over to find him standing proudly in the front yard. The grass was trimmed neatly, the hedges perfectly shaped. It looked like something out of one of those home improvement shows. "Wow, Nolan, this is incredible," I said, clapping my hands together. "You and Darius really outdid yourselves. This deserves endless praise." He beamed at me, and I pulled a crisp $100 bill out of my pocket, handing it to him. Grandma, what's this for? He asked, his eyebrows shooting up. Consider it a tip, I said with a wink. Just like when you were little and I'd slip you pocket money after you helped me with chores. He laughed, taking the bill. Ma'am, this brings back memories. Thanks, Grandma. It's nothing, I said, patting his arm. Just my way of saying I appreciate you as I walked back into the living room. Darius had just come out of the shower. His hair, those perfectly twisted dreadlocks, was still damp, and he looked even more striking than before. He had this glow about him, like he was a walking ad for confidence and vitality. The way his freshly washed t-shirt hugged his lean, muscular frame didn't help matters either. I felt a strange flutter in my chest and immediately scolded myself. What are you even thinking, Madison? Get a grip. You're 67 for crying out loud. I smiled politely, excusing myself as the two of them sat on the couch laughing and talking about their college adventures. They were so full of life, their voices filling my quiet home with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I slipped into my bedroom, closing the door gently behind me. My heart was racing, and I didn't know why. I caught my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment I just stared. What are you doing, Madison? I whispered to myself, but the thoughts wouldn't stop. My mind wandered. What would it be like to have someone like Darius in my life, to feel that warmth and connection again? I pictured him standing here in my room, his laughter echoing off the walls, and the thought made my cheeks flush. Then reality hit me like a bucket of cold water. I looked closer at my reflection, the lines on my face, the silver streaks in my hair, the skin that had lost its youthful elasticity long ago. I sighed, shaking my head. Stop this nonsense, I told myself. You're not some lovesick teenager. But the truth was, Darius had stirred something in me that I thought had been buried forever after my husband left. I'd settled into a routine that felt safe. Breakfast with the ladies at the cafe, day afternoons with a book in my lap, and evenings talking to my cat as if he could respond. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable. Now, though, something inside me felt different, alive, like I was waking up from a long sleep. I wasn't just Madison, the lonely divorced with the quiet house. I felt like a version of myself I hadn't seen in decades, a version that wanted to live, to feel, to be something more. I sat in my rolling chair, still dressed in my floral blouse and sensible slacks, and I thought about Darius. His abs and those ripped biceps that looked like they could bench press a car. I thought about what it would feel like if he held me, if those strong arms wrapped around me and pulled me close. My hand slipped there without me even realizing. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel this way. It was wrong, I knew that, but my imagination was wild now and I couldn't stop it. I pictured him walking in, catching me in this vulnerable state, and instead of being weirded out, he just smiled and come closer. But that's where I drew the line. I couldn't let myself go there. Not really. So I took a deep breath, stood up, and smoothed out my clothes. You're going to keep it together, Madison, I told myself firmly. You're going to be the perfect host, and that's it. But as I walked back out to join them, my heart was racing, and my thoughts were anything but pure. I wasn't going to let my silly feelings get the better of me. I joined the boys on the couch, have a nice normal conversation, and remind myself that I was the adult in the room, an adult who really needed to get a grip. Mind if I join you too? I asked as I stepped into the living room. Of course not, Grandma Nolan said, scooting over to make room for me. Darius gave me a little grin, one of those lopsided ones that made my stomach do an annoying little flip. The more the merrier, he said, his voice as smooth as ever. I sat down beside them, and they were in the middle of a story about some road trip they took last spring. Nolan was recounting how Darius had managed to charm their way out of a speeding ticket. Can you believe it, Grandma? The cop pulled us over, and I thought, well, this is it, we're doomed. But then Darius just flashed his smile and started talking, and by the end of it, the guy let us go. He even wished us a safe trip, Darius shrugged, his grin widening. What can I say? Some people are just immune to my charm. I raised an eyebrow, unable to resist. I can't imagine there are many people who are, he chuckled, leaning back against the couch. You'd be surprised, Miss Madison. Not everyone's as easy to win over as you. I felt my cheeks warm, but I played it off with a laugh. Oh, please, if I were any easier to win over, you'd have me mowing the lawn for you, Darius. Tilted his head, that playful gleam in his eye. Now that's a thought. I'd love to see you out there, Miss Madison. Maybe in some gardening gloves and nothing else? Nolan was mid of his soda and didn't catch the soda at all. Yeah, Grandma. You could have helped us out there. I glanced at Darius, who was barely holding back a laugh, and shot him a look that said, behave. But I couldn't stop myself either. Well, Darius, if I did, I'd probably show you a thing or two about how to really trim some bushes. His laughter came out in a low, warm humor. I don't doubt that for a second. Nolan, oblivious, started talking about some other trip they'd planned. But Darius, I kept exchanging these subtle charged comments like we were having an entirely separate conversation under the surface. I can't believe you've been living here all alone, Miss Madison, Darius said at one point, his tone just a little too suggestive. This house is too quiet for someone like you. Well, I've managed, I replied, smiling sweetly, but I guess it's nice to have a little noise every now and then. Keeps things lively. Nolan was still rattling on about something completely unaware, and I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. Part of me couldn't believe I was letting this happen, but another part of me, one I hadn't listened to in years, was enjoying every second. Eventually, the night settled in. I made sure both their beds were ready and tucked in the fresh linens. All right, boys, I said as I finished up. Have a good night's sleep. Well, Nolan gave me a tired smile. Thanks, Grandma. You too. Darius nodded, flashing me one of his signature grins. Good night, Miss Madison. With that, I headed to my own room, hoping to finally get some sleep, but as the hours dragged on, I couldn't seem to shake this restlessness that had taken root inside me. My mind wouldn't settle, no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. The house was so quiet now, the lively chatter of the day replaced by stillness, and it only made my unease worse. I paced my room for what felt like hours, the soft padding of my slippers barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. Couldn't take it anymore. I stepped out of my room, telling myself I'd just grab some water or check on the thermostat. The lights were off, and the house was steeped in the kind of calm that only comes when everyone else is fast asleep. I walked past Nolan's room first, hearing his steady, soft breathing. Then I stopped outside Darius's room. The door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling into the hallway way. I don't know what compelled me, but I pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. There he was, sitting up in bed, his laptop balanced on his knees. He was shirtless, wearing only a pair of gray sweatpants that sat low on his hips. The glow of the screen lit up his face, and for a moment I just stood there, unsure of what to do, when he noticed me. He nearly jumped out of his skin, snapping his laptop shut like I'd caught him committing a crime. "Oh, Miss Madison, you..." Startled me, he stammered, clearly flustered. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said quickly, feeling just as awkward. "I didn't mean to scare you, I was just checking in." No, it's fine," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I was just watching a horror movie. It gave me a bit of a fright, that's all." I raised an eyebrow, immediately suspicious. His reaction didn't exactly scream horror movie, but I decided to play along a horror movie. Haha, which one? He hesitated, clearly scrambling for an answer. The Conjuring 2, I think. I bit back a smile, folding my arms. Well, that's a good one. Maybe I should join you. I haven't had a good scare in a while. His eyes widened slightly, but then he nodded, moving over to make room. Sure, Miss Madison. Feel free to hop in. I slid into the bed beside him, my heart thumping in my chest. The situation was entirely innocent on the surface, at least, but it felt... But he reopened Netflix and scrolled through the horror section, eventually landing on a newer flick I hadn't seen before. "This one's supposed to be pretty creepy," he said, hitting play as the movie started. We settled in side by side, the faint hum of the laptop filling the room. The flickering light from the screen danced across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the curve of his lips. I tried to focus on the movie, but my thoughts kept drifting. This was probably the most thrilling thing that had happened to me in years, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. As we continued watching the movie, the tension in the room built up with every passing moment. The horror film wasn't one I would usually get scared by. After all, I'd spent years living in this house all by myself, unbothered by the creaks and groans of the old walls, but there was something about this particular movie. The sudden jump scare caught me off guard, and before I knew it, I found myself instinctively moving closer to Darius, burying my face in his chest. It was a reflex, purely a momentary lapse, but when I realized what I'd done, I pulled back immediately, embarrassment flooding my face. "Sorry, it's just the movie," I muttered, trying to make light of it. Darius chuckled softly. "No need to apologize. It's just a movie. Miss Madison." His voice was warm and reassuring, and he gave me a gentle smile without hesitation. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Don't worry, I've got you." I leaned into him, the warmth of his body offering an unexpected comfort for a moment. It reminded me of the times when my husband and I would sit together, sharing quiet evenings in front of the TV, but those memories had become bittersweet, tainted by the way he'd walked out on me for someone younger, someone who wasn't me. I tried to push the thought away, but it lingered, a sharp pang in my chest. Then out of nowhere I felt it. The urge. It was like my body was acting on its own accord, and before I could even process what was happening, I leaned in and kissed him. Darius was taken aback, his body stiffening slightly, but then after a beat, he kissed me back, his lips soft and gentle. It was a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Our breath mingling in the dark room. When I pulled away, I was already apologizing. "I'm so sorry, Darius. I don't know what came over me. I shouldn't have." But he stopped me with a finger to my lips and whispered, "Shh, don't apologize. I've been feeling the same way since the moment I stepped into this house. There's something about you. Miss Madison, I don't know how to explain it." We laid there, our eyes locked for what felt like an eternity, until Darius reached out to me, his eyes searching mine for permission, and when I gave it with a nod, he leaned down. I felt the ache of longing that had been buried under layers of loneliness and duty. The next thing I knew, we were both lying there, exposed to the cool air, and when he finally took my hand and placed it there, I realized what I had been missing out in life. The anticipation was almost unbearable now. What followed next almost shook the very foundations of the old house. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long. The raw, unbridled passion that had been missing from my life. But I couldn't help but wonder if this was a mistake, if tomorrow would bring regret, or if this was the start of something new. But for now, all I could do was hold on to him, feeling his heartbeat match my own as we both explored this beautiful dynamic.